Deep in the mountains of the western wilderness, the elusive spirit of wild, untamed North America still runs free. Once horses roamed free throughout the world. Now banished by civilization to a few remote outposts, they make a final stand against the unforgiving pressures of progress. And their days, like their numbers, are in danger of vanishing forever. In North America, the wild Mustang, once numbered in the thousands, ruled the West and became a symbol of frontier freedom. But now, they too stand firmly on the brink of extinction. "55 million years ago, the evolutionary journey of the horse began here in North America. Its prehistoric lineage can be traced back to a small, dog-like creature with 5 toes that over time would adapt to the Great Plains and ultimately a single hoof. 15 million years later, descendants of the first horse began to migrate across the long-gone land bridge between Europe and the Americas. As the glaciers of the last great ice age retreated 13,000 years ago, the mountain foothills became the feeding grounds for an abundance of mammoths, camels, bison, musk oxen, and large herds of pony-sized horses. Fleet of foot and quick of ear and nostril, they were well adapted to life on the open steppes. But 2,000 years later, the North American horse mysteriously vanished. In 1996, on the drought-stricken bed of Alberta's St. Mary Reservoir, local schoolteacher Shane Tolman took a walk into history. Glittering in the sand, he found a spearhead. Looking closer, he found dozens more, and beside them, animal footprints. And then he found what made them. The bones of a wealth of Ice Age animals. Rarest of all were the skeletons of prehistoric wild horses. Intrigued with the news that animal remains and human artifacts had been found in the same place, a team of scientists went to investigate what became one of the most significant archaeological discoveries in North American history. On the surface, the arid reservoir revealed an astonishing visual profile of animal and human interaction at the end of the last ice age. But as they dug deeper, their excitement grew with the discovery of new evidence that could solve an ancient mystery.
There's no other site in North America, probably in the world, that has the richness of animal tracks from the end of the glacial period. No other site like that in North America, and probably not in the world.
3 meters 50 by 75 centimeters to the east.
The other thing that's really, really significant about this site is the fact that we have horses that we can see were exploited by people. And there are archaeological sites elsewhere in North America where there are 1 or 2 horse bones. But this is the only site where we have a number of horses, stone tools associated with them, cut mark bone. We can actually see that people were hunting and butchering these animals.
Using the carbon-14 method, the site could be dated to about 11,300 years ago, when southern Alberta looked a lot like Africa's teeming Serengeti Plain, and herds of ancient animals roamed its grasslands.
We lost there for a carbon-14 date.
It was also the time when many of these remarkable creatures began to inexplicably disappear. Although several unproven theories exist, the horse skeletons and native artifacts found together at the site are the first solid evidence that hunting was a contributing factor. 14,000 years ago, big game hunters from Siberia crossed the Bering Land Bridge to a new world. Using simple stone-tipped spears, the first North Americans were fearless predators, but no evidence existed to suggest they were also hunting wild horses.
These points were all found at the site. These two actually had horse protein residue on them, and that's the key thing. When you find the people's tools, in particular weapon tips, covered in the protein residue of the horses, well, there you are. That's pretty clear proof that they were actually using these in hunting the horses.
The lure of a constant water supply for hundreds of animals made the banks of the ancient river valley an ideal ambush site. Spear tips found and dated here prove that human hunters were doing just that as far back as 13,000 years ago.
It's telling us a slice of our history that we had no clue about really before at all. And of course, because some of this stuff is totally unique, it's giving us a slice of, late Pleistocene, early Holocene, right at the end of the Ice Age, a slice of animal and human history at that time. The issues about how the horses went extinct here in North America is complex. At the end of the Ice Age, there's a great deal of change that's happening in the environment. And into that, you throw suddenly a new predator on these animals, and that would be humans. Then maybe that tips the scale, just in terms of, being in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Only mute bones, scarred by stone cutting tools, speak of his origins and perhaps his extinction. But 11 millennia later, the journey of the North American horse would continue. In 1519, conquistador Hernando Cortés reintroduced the horse to its evolutionary birthplace on the east coast of Mexico. The breed was called the Spanish colonial horse, and it would help shape the destiny of a continent. In 1808, the first white man to cross the Canadian Rockies and enter the Namaya Valley reported meeting Indian warriors on horseback here, riding swiftly across the plateau. Today, not much has changed for the Heniquitine First Nation, who can't remember a time or a life without horses. "250 years after its reintroduction, the Spanish horse had been adopted by First Nation tribes from Texas to Canada. Settlers' horses added to the bloodline, and by the 18th century they numbered in the hundreds of thousands. They called the breed a Mustang, from the Spanish mestina, meaning wild, unbranded horse. Settlers called them feral trespassers who stole grass from their cattle. And in British Columbia alone, over 10,000 were killed. But inside the territory of the Heniquitine, about 150 still prevail. Isolated deep in the interior, the land of the Heniguitine is the Brittany Triangle, a rare, pristine ecosystem that has never experienced the effects of logging or mining. Towering above is Mount Silosh, whose legend says that pointing at it will bring a terrible change in the weather.
To us, it's a sanctuary for the wild horses, for the people. It has been the way it is before European contact, and today it's still the same. We always hunted, we always fish, we always food gather, we always prepared for the winter. A lot of our people, use the land, live off the land. Even there's stories of how we used to gather, go into other Chilcotin communities, and I always seem to remember that horses is always part of the Chilcotin, part of the Heniguitine people.
Unlike the beaver or bear, in Canada the wild western horse isn't classed as wild, or even a Mustang, although its origins or genetics have never been studied. But to the people who've lived here for thousands of years, it's one of nature's gifts that helped create one of the last surviving horse cultures in North America.
In the Brittany Triangle, those wild horses are there for us to take when we need it. We use it as transportation. We use it as recreation. Our forefathers before us have used those and trained these wild horses. And these wild horses being part of us is something that we don't want to lose.
Until the first and only road was built in 1973, the only way in or out of the valley was on horseback, a journey that could take a week. Today, ancient horse trails are still the preferred highway, made by the wild Mustangs of the Henny people. Recognized in the United States as an indigenous breed, Mustangs are smaller and lighter in the hindquarter than the modern quarter horse. Marked by long tails and generous forelocks, its Spanish origins are most notable in the convex profile of its Iberian head. Well adapted to life in the wild, the Mustang's historic role in the culture of the Heniguitine has withstood the test of time. The Gymkhana, or horse competition, is a traditional source of recreation and equestrian training for the Henny people and their wild mountain horses. Barrel racing is a popular sport, and the corral, like the baseball diamond or hockey arena, is a common social gathering place.
Yeah, it's good. Bring our horses back any over him? I guess so, right?
Harry Sita is the warden of the Namaya Aboriginal Nature Reserve and a respected horse trainer who's captured many of the band's current wild stock.
This is a coyote. He came from the Connie Lake side hill. And I caught him when he was 1 year old. He's 5 years old right today. And look at him. We got a lot of uses for these horses. Horses like a cayuse, we use them for mountains, pack trips, things like that.
It's ironic that Harry would use the word cayuse to describe a native horse. It comes from the Cayuse Indians, a tribe that ceased to exist a long time ago.
The only mechanic you have to do on these horses is just put shoes on them. That's all you do. And no flat tires. You can go 12 hours a day. You don't have to worry about gas or breakdowns. Or these guys just need grass and water. That's about it.
The building of the road has forced a change to the legend of Mount Silosh. Now it's said that if a newcomer points at it, their vehicle will break down. Time is catching up to the Namaya Valley, and a culture rich in tradition and horses.
Our people have been using horses as far as I can remember, all the time. You're talking about moose and deer, that's part of our survival. And anything that happens on the land that affects them will affect us. The same with the wild horses. If something happens to the land that affects them, it's going to affect our livelihood.
The Henigutin may be able to harness their future, but for the wild Mustang, the journey remains precarious until their legend can become scientific fact. Ranches on the eastern slope of the Rocky Mountains were founded by men on horseback. Cowboy culture is still alive and well here, and celebrated in towns like Dog Pound, Alberta, site of one of the world's oldest rodeos. Like the First Nations of the Great Plains, the first cowboys also rode the Spanish pony called the Mustang. Now the larger American quarter horse is king. But a century ago, it was the wild Mustang who bucked the hardest and drew the crowds. Today, only a few small herds remain, and their place in frontier history almost forgotten.
I learned to ride before I learned to walk. 94 years ago, my mother used to take me with her on the saddle horse, and you know, we had enough wild horses at that time. They were really beautiful. They'd stand on a ridge and they'd watch you. They wasn't afraid because nobody ever bothered them until the meat hunters started chasing them. They wasn't any wilder than the other animals. Now they're the wildest thing in the bush. And pretty well the scarcest too.
The eastern slope is a vast territory of ancient rock and lush valleys, ideal for grazing cattle and horses. Deep in the foothills, Hummingbird Ranch is the home of Slim Davis. Born and raised at a mountain's foot, Slim grew up alongside the Stoney and Blackfoot Indians, tribes whose culture flourished with the arrival of the horse. He saw his first Mustang in 1920 and remembers a time when thousands roamed wild and free.
I rode that saddle thousands of miles. I liked it for roping horses because it was good and strong and you don't have to cinch it too tight. I roped a lot of horses with that saddle.
It was a lot easier for Slim to saddle up 80 years ago, but once on, it's still tough to buck him off.
But don't.
Slim's no scientist, but a lifetime in the Rockies has made him a wildlife expert in his own right. And during most of it, he's fought hard to protect the wild Mustang.
Well, rangers don't do anything to protect the wild horses. The government won't either. I tell you, I've been to meetings over these here different things. The guys that have the say has never been here. They've never seen it. And yet them's the guys that make the laws.
Like British Columbia, Alberta considers all wild horses to be feral and allowed thousands of them to be killed off. In 1974, Slim convinced the government to outlaw hunting them on public land, but their numbers still declined. And now it's rare for even Slim to see one.
There never was a big bunch of wild horses. Well, there used to be many little bunches. The only natural enemy that wild horses you got is the wild horse hunters. Cougar might kill the odd colt, but not likely. And the wolves just can't get into a pack of wild horses. When there were lots of wild horses, there were lots of mule deer, because when the wolves would bother the deer would run to the horses. So that was just nature's way of doing things.
In man's world, a bighorn mountain ram is worth a small fortune to a trophy hunter. But after fall hunting season is over, goats, deer, and moose are all protected by strict wildlife laws, while the wild horse remains fair game. In the United States, wild horses have been protected since 1959, but here in the heartland of the Canadian West, it's still legal to shoot a wild horse on private land and sell it for dog food.
Well, how come we're still here?
Slim's too old now to take his fight to the government. But like the horse he still champions, he's become a living legend, drawing people to the ranch to listen and learn firsthand his version of rough-hewn natural history.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Hey, Slim, how about a palm?
When you start up a trail on the day you're born, with many a curve and bend, you don't know where it'll lead you, and you don't know when it'll end. But when you come to the end of the trail, there's nothing there to fear. Your spirit will leave your body, and your spirit will still be here.
Haunted by visions of trails plowed under, today old cowboys can only dream that some things, priceless, will survive the steel wheels of progress.
I'd like to see the wild horses protected, what's left of them. Well, I'd like to see them left anyway, some, you know, because they're not hurting anything, and they got a right to be here. They was here before people was. If these guys say, well, their horses have got away, you know, I know better than that.
In the rodeo or on the range, Slim's ridden with the best of them. His trail may be coming to an end, but at least he knows that somewhere out there the last wild Mustangs still run free. In 1895, a census taken of the Alberta wild horse population counted over 42,000 head. Today, about 300 remain. After running for a century from the pressures of progress, their behavior, like their numbers, has changed dramatically. Extremely sensitive to every sight and sound, they now prefer thick forest cover to graze in rather than the open range. But so far, they've beaten the odds, prevailing over hunters, harsh weather, intense grazing competition, and a high infant mortality rate, conditions that domestic rejects couldn't survive for even a decade. In the lexicon of nature, these are wild horses. They travel in small bands of mares and colts, ruled by a stud horse or stallion. He maintains his band year-round and controls it with an iron will. The band will establish a home range of about 15 square miles and mark it with manure that send a scent warning to rival stallions. The Rockies are the northern limit of wild horse country. Winters are severe, and often the snow is too deep to forage unless a warm Chinook wind decides to blow. Like the male alpha wolf, the stallion is constantly alert, watching for intruders and ready to challenge anything that approaches his harem. But it's an older mare who knows the range well, who will actually lead the band away from any threat. Foals are usually born from March to June and can run at the gallop 48 hours after birth, essential to their survival where cougars or grizzlies wait in ambush. Cowboys claim that it's impossible to break a mature wild horse. The only way is to capture them young, at a year or less. In the West, stories are still told of wild horses willing themselves to death after only a few days of being deprived of their freedom. Horses are extremely social animals, but for wild horses in particular, the band is crucial to survival. They keep together to fight off predators or to stay warm in a blizzard. Always there's a sentinel, watching for danger and allowing the rest to graze or sleep in peace. Feral horse, trespass grazer, and wild Mustang are sensitive issues in the Canadian West, where the right to graze cattle on public lands is a jealously guarded asset. Eldon Bruns is a wildlife biologist with the Alberta government. Well versed in horse behavior, he's uncomfortable calling them wild, like the elk, wolf, or grizzly he's observed here for the past 20 years.
We've got around 300 head of horses. It probably has been up to 1,000 in the past. So the government is trying to maintain them roughly at that level for the last several years. If an area seems to be increasing, they will allow ranchers, outfitters, cowboys that are interested, they will allow them a permit for a designated area to come in and catch wild horses.
The government's mandate here has never been to define the terms wild or feral. It's politics and money. Every year, large tracts of public grassland are leased to the cattle industry, and grass eaten by a wild horse is that much less to feed the insatiable appetite of 100,000 head of beef. The ecological impact of 300 wild horses seems small, but they still create a big problem. Under pressure from both ranchers and conservationists like Slim Davis, Alberta now tolerates small bands of horses on public land, but remains indifferent to proving that they could be a natural treasure.
As far as tracing their genetics back to the original Spanish Mustangs, there probably is a little trace in there, but it'll be pretty thin. But all the horses in the wild horses in Alberta should technically be called feral horses. They're horses that were at some stage domesticated, released. There are several generations out here now probably that haven't been handled by man, but the original stock was definitely introduced.
The question is, who introduced it? A rancher or a conquistador? Since the West was opened, Though the number of wild horses has dwindled drastically, it has never completely vanished. Historically, the bloodline can still be traced unbroken from 16th century Mexico to present-day Alberta as one genetic heritage. But since no one has ever genetically tested a wild horse in the Canadian West, no one really knows for sure. Like the old Hollywood westerns, the Mustang is still part fact and part fiction. Dwayne Papke has been a mountain guide and outfitter for over 30 years. He's a new breed of cowboy and runs a successful ranch for tourists near Banff, Alberta's famous national park.
Come on, boys. Come on, boys. Come on, boys. Come on.
Every summer, people from around the world come here to experience the lifestyle of the Old West. A big part of the draw are the elusive bands of wild horses who found refuge in the remote backcountry. Like a lot of modern cowboys, Dwayne's skeptical of their Spanish origins, but he can't deny their important role in his own Western heritage and his business.
I have a great love for the wild horses. It is adrenaline pump to see that animal in the wild, free, and fighting the elements to exist, and which carries on today. You'll go through a valley where you might see 50 to 60 head of these wild horses, and they're just little different bunches. To me, that is one of the greatest views that you want to set your eyes on.
Dwayne's backyard is known as the Yahatinda Ranch region, most of it remote, unspoiled public land, ideal for wild horses.
There's a few more people in the area besides myself. We felt that these numbers of the wild horses should be maintained to where we have this value of taking people out to see these wild horses. You look at some areas with easy access, we find that the numbers dwindle in them areas a lot faster than the more areas that are rugged and hard to get at.
The Yahatinda is a designated wilderness preserve, and the only grazing competition for wild horses here are other wild animals like the elk. Ironically, it too is a reintroduced animal, but strictly protected. "30 years on this range has made Dwayne one of the best horse trackers in the business, and when he finds unshod footprints, he can usually follow them right to the source.
It's just a 4-year-old stud. He's all by himself. The reason he come in to look at us is here as we spooked him off of the flat. Being by himself, he's pretty leery of us.
Moving slow and careful, Dwayne follows the young stud's trail. He could be part of a band of bachelors driven from their herds by the dominant stallion until they're older and strong enough to assert their right to breed. Soon enough, he's proven right. High on a hill is a rare sight, a band of young stallions. But instead of running for cover, they stand and watch Dwayne approach. They seem intrigued by his whistling, and quite possibly have heard it before. By nature, these animals are extremely nervous, especially of man. and only the stallion will dare approach an intruder to learn whether they are friend or foe. It's a rare moment for these horses too. This is a human who poses no threat. Both the ancient and reintroduced wild horse evolved as a prairie dweller, using speed of foot as their primary survival mechanism. One false move and they're gone, in a flash. In Dwayne's words, it's adrenaline pumping to see a horse running free in the wild, but even in this remote backcountry, band sizes are decreasing and horses harder to find.
In Alberta here, through the wild horses and the existence of the wild horses for all these years, we feel that there could be a sanctuary set up just for these horses. To me, it's a forefather system back through heritage, and to me, my grandchildren and the future grandchildren of other people that have a love for a horse should see these running in the wild, and the wishing that they have a good future is how I look at it.
Dwayne even has a name for his wild mountain sanctuary. In an upland meadow at the headwaters of a glacier-fed stream, a place called Wild Horse Creek. But for the wild Mustangs of Alberta, getting there may be a long time coming. A 1,000 miles due east of the Rocky Mountains, in the heart of the Canadian prairies, lives a very special horse. Shandy is a 25-year-old Spanish Mustang. In 1976, her mother was captured in foal, not far from Dwayne Papke's ranch, and 6 months later, Shandy was born. She now belongs to Steve Howlett, whose farm is located in Dugald, Manitoba, about as far as you can get from the wild horse's home range, and a lot safer. Shandy was a horse with a will of her own when Steve first acquired her.
Ain't nothing here gonna hurt you.
Although born and raised in captivity, the wild mountain life seemed bred into her genes, and it took hard work and a lot of patience to win her trust.
And the first thing I remember about her was the fact that, oh my God, she's so small. My boss, an old cowboy, came up and he said, "What are you looking at?" And I said, "Well, look at her." He smiled at me and he says, "You know, you're going to wear the seat of your pants out before you wear her out." She was tough as nails.
I think he's a little upset without you.
Hey, honey.
Steve Howlett, it turns out, is as unique as his horse. In the United States, scientists have genetically tested wild horses extensively and found Spanish DNA in at least 3 herds. But in Canada, only Steve Howlett has spent the time and money to test a single wild horse, Shandy.
She had the same pattern as all of the sulfur horses from Utah, most of the Tigers from Oregon, and most of the registered Spanish Mustangs in the States. They all have the same Iberian pattern that modern horses don't have.
Sir.
Once he'd confirmed and registered Shandy's Mustang bloodline, Howlett began a one-man breeding program. Hoping to preserve his horse's unique pedigree, he recently brought another registered Spanish Mustang to the farm, an American stallion called Silvertip. For his small size, the stallion is extremely jealous of his mare and takes exception to any show of interest, even if a fence divides him from his rivals. The standoff is frustrating for Silvertip. He'd like to see his competitors running for the hills, but that won't happen here. These Mustangs are far from the fields of freedom. What's even more frustrating is having only one lonesome mare to bully around, instead of an entire harem.
In a lot of cases, a horse is a horse. A lot of their behavior is the same. There is kind of some peculiarities about Spanish Mustangs.
Hey, Mama, how you doing, huh?
There was a saying that not all Spanish Mustangs are wild, and not all wild horses are Spanish Mustangs.
How you doing, hun? Hmm? How you today? Huh?
A lot are ranch bred now, but they're not housed in barns. They retain the toughness, they retain their wild instincts that way. Silvertip was brought up to perpetuate her line. We're hoping for 1, 2, if we're really lucky, maybe three foals off her, that we can keep this uniquely Canadian line intact. And the more we have, the broader the genetics, the greater chance of survival these horses have.
So far, not a single scientific body has expressed interest in Howlett's one-man genetic study. And although he's fought hard to protect the wild Mustang, she goes unrecognized in Canada. Today, Shandy is a mature 25, old for a horse, older still for a broodmare, and the odds of Silvertip breeding with her successfully are slim at best.
She's the only horse from a Canadian wild herd that is registered with any of the Spanish Mustang or Spanish colonial registries anywhere. Shandy is the only living proof we have that these horses are descended from Spanish horses, that there is something special in the Rockies of Alberta and quite possibly in the Rockies of British Columbia. In the States, they seem to take great pride in the Western heritage that these horses show now. In Canada, we ignore them. I'd really hate to think that you would be the last Spanish Mustang that we have in Canada.
What if the ancient horse of North America had not become extinct 11,000 years ago? What would it look like? And would it still be wild or free? The answer may lie in its ancestors and their descendants, who now roam the world, including the new North America. Here, the wild horse called Mestina maintains a precarious hold on survival, a paradoxical symbol of freedom in a changing world. But wherever man lives on the planet, our treatment of wild horses echoes our response to all species of wildlife. And despite laws, or the lack of them, the saga continues at the horse's expense. No other creature has affected man's imagination, entered his soul, and captured his heart as much as the horse. For these reasons alone, we can't afford to lose any of them.
What do you hear in the lonely howl of the wolf? Does it send a cold shiver down your spine or raise your spirits as only the call of the wild can? Myth, fable, and blatant lies plague the wolf like no other species. No more controversial animal lives. None is so hated. None so misunderstood. In the wilderness or in our living rooms, the howl of the wolf speaks to us in many ways. Yet rarely do we listen. Deep in the Canadian heartland, a modern-day drama between two of the world's greatest predators is taking place on a stage of unrivaled natural beauty. Algonquin Park is one of the largest and oldest wilderness parks in North America. Located in a transition zone between northern coniferous and southern hardwood forests, a startling diversity of over 1,000 plants, 270 birds, and 40 mammals has evolved here. Observing wolves in the wild is a rare experience. Highly social, superbly intelligent, and extremely cautious, they're seldom seen, but often heard. Michael Runce was 3 years old when he first visited Algonquin Park. 40 years later, his childhood fascination has become a lifelong passion.
Wolves are sort of one of the target species that I was really after when I started work here in 1972. And the very first time I met a wolf was by its voice, as is the standard way to meet wolves here in Algonquin Park. And it was a nice dark night. We were tracking wolves, trying to locate wolves by foot. We walked up this wonderful portage trail into the dark night, and there it was, a howling from the distant lakeshore. That experience was really moving, you know, hearing the first wild wolf of my life. And that was to be repeated many times in the years to come. Over those years, I've been supposedly working, but really just enjoying myself. This park is a phenomenal park. It's one of these places that is unique for its feel.
Algonquin Park has no towering mountains or deep whitewater canyons. Its appeal lies in a simple, accessible bond between people and nature. For many, it's the site of their first canoe trip, their first sighting of a moose or deer, their first symphony of wolf howls by starlight. But the park is wild, complex, and fragile, a place that takes a lifetime to know intimately. To most park visitors, the true face of nature remains invisible behind an indomitable wall of wilderness. It's just there, naturally. But not to John and Mary Theberge. They too have spent a lifetime in the park, learning the lexicon of its most indomitable animal.
My relationship with Algonquin wolves began by chance when I was assigned to a wolf biologist named Douglas Pimod, who worked for the then Ontario Department of Lands and Forests when I was in grade 13. We knew nothing about ecology of wolves. We were starting at sort of square one. He wasn't keen on getting into radiotelemetry, which we've used extensively, and found out a lot about wolves from the technology was young then and uncertain. So we used howling to try to find wolves, and I canoed the park twice over at night. It's only in recent years I've seen a lot of these lakes, howling at them, conducting census work.
Our first experience was just shortly after we were married. And John suggested that we come for a canoe trip up to Algonquin Park, and I naively said, well, do we have a tent? He said, no. I said, well, where will we sleep? Well, under the canoe will be fine if it rains. So as it happened, it did rain during the night, and the sleeping bag was completely wet. Fog came in and just blanketed the whole area. In the morning when we got up, you couldn't see anything, but we did give a howl and had a response from some wolves and decided to paddle out to where the response came from. And gradually the fog did lift, and lo and behold, just above us on the rock, 3 wolves appeared. Well, I guess I could have had my walking papers at that point and left the marriage, but I didn't. It was the most exhilarating experience I had. It was my introduction to wolves, and 37 years later I'm still here in the game. People see the wolf as a thing of beauty, and they have a reverence for it. To them, it is a part of a wilderness that's dying and no longer is to be found everywhere in this country. And for them, this song of the wilderness, the song of the wolf, has a lot of meaning.
Established in 1893, Algonquin Park is renowned for its lush wilderness and diverse wildlife. The lord of this jungle is the wolf, North America's premier land predator. The wolf is considered a keystone species, maintaining the wild, natural balance by regulating the populations of all other species.
There it is, very faint. Go to the bend in the road there and maybe try for the antenna.
John and Mary Theberge have spent the last 14 years studying Algonquin's wolf population.
There you go.
Although they rarely see one, they know more about the wolves here than anyone else in the world. By tracking radio-collared animals, they can analyze movement patterns and ultimately wolf behavior, most of it hidden behind the facade of thick forests.
Do you have a bearing on it?
Yeah, just a minute. It's faint, so it's not going to be a great bearing, but 275.
You're getting some movement then, because it was louder when we first got here.
Well, maybe, but the signal's pretty steady. It's almost up the road, because the road curves.
To study wolves, a good place to start is at the beginning, the den site.
It looks like the jack pine pack's been using this area again this year. Okay, it looks like it's been used. You can see the claw marks on the side. See these claw marks over here? These are new from last year.
That whole area is new. That's dug back in there. Have you got a flashlight?
I do.
And there's more claw marks.
Oh, look at the way that's all crumbly. That.
You see on the right-hand side, there's 2 sort of dents in the ground.
Mm-hmm.
They could be pup tracks too. Real soft ground.
Something has used it, because usually there's a lot more debris and cobwebs that hang down, and that's all being cleared off.
Well, it's a really good den site. Good one to use again. Sandy soil, easy digging. It's high on a south-facing slope.
Actually, when you look at the trails, they're like a spoke coming in on a wheel. They're definitely coming into a central place, and they're more used than they were last year.
The Théberges have a close relationship with their wolves and have given each pack a name. This den used to belong to the Hardwood pack, which was killed after it strayed outside the park. The Jack Pine pack quickly moved in, extending its own territory in a very unnatural way.
The bottom line with the Hardwood pack is it paid the price of having half its territory in the park and some outside the park, like so many packs have, and went outside the park and was killed. So we lost a whole pack. In a social animal like this, the experience of a female in raising young is important in its success. So in the Algonquin population, females get 1, maybe 2 chances at being breeding females, and then they're dead.
After a decade of research, the Théberges concluded that Algonquin's wolf population was plummeting to dangerously low levels due to merciless hunting outside the park. Their conclusions created a controversy over the protection of wolves, but it was only the beginning. In 1998, after several more years of genetic analysis, they made an amazing discovery.
One of the really big surprises in our research, which we thought was a study of the gray wolf, is that that's not the wolf that's here at all. To everybody's surprise, the genetics results discovered that we really have been studying the red wolf, not the gray wolf. There's 2 species of wolves in the world, both live in North America, the red wolf and the gray wolf. The red wolf was thought to live only, well, it lived only in eastern North America, supposedly from about the southeast, from Virginia south to Florida. Gray wolves inhabited the rest of North America. But red wolves became extinct in the wild in about 1965 or 1970. There's only one wild red wolf population. It was reintroduced at great expense by the U.S. government into North Carolina, some captive stock. So this looks like a species about to go out of existence, and to everybody's surprise, we suddenly find another population of it, and it's here in Algonquin Park.
The Théberges' discovery of a rare wolf species, not even supposed to exist in Canada, was viewed with suspicion due to their controversial opinions about the declining wolf numbers in the park. Even Michael Runce wasn't convinced at first.
In the early years, we always wondered why the animals here were so small and more brightly colored. I've seen wolves in northern Ontario, and they're quite a bit different looking. They're bigger and more gray. And finally, when I began to really analyze what was being written about the red wolf situation and the DNA results, then I finally came to the conclusion that they're right, that these are red wolves.
Almost overnight, Algonquin Park had become a fortress for one of the world's rarest animals. But could even a park protect it?
There's not many ways to get around the park apart from on foot or by canoe. But that's the beauty of the park. It's got this great network of lakes and rivers and streams, and you can paddle almost anywhere. Now, of course, there are some carry points, some portages to deal with, but they aren't that bad. And actually, it's kind of fun carrying an 80-pound canoe and your camera gear over a 2-kilometer portage. It's good for you.
Algonquin Park is laced with 1,600 kilometers of canoe routes, and Michael Runce has probably traveled on every one as a leading park naturalist and photographer. Wherever there's a beaver pond, it's a good bet you'll find wolves prowling for a snack. Of all animals other than the wolf, the beaver has the most powerful impact on this ecosystem. Throughout Algonquin, there are thousands of beaver ponds, which create habitats for a lot of other animals. The ponds, for example, support water plants which are high in sodium and a favorite food of the moose. But with so many beavers around, without the wolf to regulate their population, Algonquin Park could become one gigantic beaver pond. And with the decline in the park's deer population, the beaver has become a major new food source for the declining wolf population. To study one of nature's most elusive animals, wolf scat has become an important research tool for John and Mary Theberge.
There's 2 scats here.
Scat is another form of communication. To scientists, it tells a tale of current or changing eating habits. To wolves, animals who live in a world mapped out by scent, it marks their territory.
Yeah.
That one?
But this one's older than the other one, and there's quite a bit of coarse hair in there. Could be the deer or moose.
Yeah, I don't see any beaver in it.
The other one looked like it could have some beaver. Well, it was, but this one seems far coarser than a beaver hair would be.
Yeah.
Well, there are no tracks on the road either, so.
Okay.
We collect about 1,000 scats a year, and from that we can analyze what the wolves are eating. Their diet consists of approximately 1/3 beaver, 1/3 moose, 1/3 deer. This has been different from the 1960s, where the diet was primarily 80% deer.
Wolves defecate not just for the normal purposes, but they also mark their territories with the scats. That's why we left part of the scat there, because if we didn't, we would take away this territorial marking. Other wolves come along and realize the territory's occupied.
That olfactory sac is 14 times larger than ours, and some behaviorists have estimated that their sense of smell then is developed 100 times more than ours. So that offers a whole spectrum to them that we don't have. It can read a whole story into the scent path of various animals.
The optimum prey is deer. Deer sort of jerk the wolves around the most. When the deer migrate, the wolves won't migrate with them. It's the energy package about maximum, optimum for them in terms of energy expended versus energy gained back, whereas beaver are only eaten in large numbers when deer are at low numbers unavailable, because they spend a lot of energy and only get a small amount back. Whereas moose are a more formidable prey, and they probably will hunt and maybe chase and surround and test a lot more moose before they'll get one successfully than they do a deer.
Algonquin wolves do eat more beaver than most other wolves, but deer remains their primary food source. Hunting in packs, they prey on older or weaker animals, which are easier to hunt down. And when they do, their legacy as the world's most ruthless land predator is easy to understand. This young deer was torn apart in only a few hours. By the time the pack moved on, only bits of fur and fragments of bone remained. Nothing was wasted.
Got some really fresh wolf droppings over here. Probably no more than a day old at most, if that. It still looks wet actually where they urinated too around them. So there is a wolf not too far away. Maybe up here somewhere.
The highly organized social structure of the wolf pack is key to hunting the largest of all the prey animals. Weighing in at over half a ton, it takes the combined energy of the entire pack to bring down a moose. In autumn, moose leave the sanctuary of wetlands behind to begin the annual rut. Exposed on dry land and hampered by thick underbrush, they become easier prey.
It's early October now. There's a beautiful frost on the plants this morning, nice mist over the water. There has been a pack of wolves around for a couple of days back in the valley somewhere over there. This time of year they still do use rendezvous sites, but they also travel to kills more regularly too with the pups. And by the sounds of the ravens squawking over there, there has to be a kill. This is why that pack of wolves is around here. There's not much left. In fact, they're chewing on the bones for the marrow content. There's all kinds of signs around here of a great struggle, broken off branches and fairly large saplings smashed right down. Wolves don't kill and then waste their food and go off and kill something else. When they kill an animal like a moose, they stay and they feast on it for days. And this animal here fed not only wolves, but ravens and perhaps fisher, marten, even a fox. A lot of things benefit from a wolf-killed animal.
No one else in the world has collected as much comprehensive wolf research as John and Mary Theberge. Their most important tool is the radio collar. But before they can track this elusive predator, who can see, hear, and smell much better than humans, they have to catch them.
We have to approach the animal very quietly and very cautiously, not for fear for ourselves, but because we don't want the animal disturbed. We don't want the animal to be too frightened. We don't want this. It's a harrowing experience for it, being trapped, being caught, and having humans approach, because most humans kill them when they're in this situation. Now, we could go up to it with a syringe and sedate it, but again, we find that the animal is so frightened of us that it develops a lot of anxiety behavior and begins jumping and trying to get away. So John will try to divert it, and I will approach it with a poke stick that's about 6 feet long, and it doesn't even notice this poke stick, and I close the syringe and inject it with the drug.
We trap these animals. We do them with humane traps that are made for research with offset jaws and padded jaws and all the rest of it, and take all sorts of care not to damage these animals. when you catch them and you have at your feet an animal when they're in a trap, they're totally afraid. They're never aggressive. They're totally afraid. And there you have this animal laying, that your vision of wilderness, the animal you respect, and you've reduced it to the lying in front of you, drugged out. It's very emotional, very difficult. It's not been a pleasant part of the research for us, but it's been a necessity.
At that point, the next thing we do is put on the collar. We make sure the collar's working. We note the frequency, and we attach the collar to it, making sure that we have enough room that the animal, if it's swallowing a whole chunk of meat, isn't going to be choked by the meat, so there's enough room for the meat to slide down. But at the same time, the collar can't be so loose that it's going to be able to bring it up over its head. We measure the animal, and we look for any injuries, we look for disease, we look for mange. The animal's 282. And then finally we weigh the wolf before we let it go, and after that we can track it both from the ground and from the air.
We've radio collared 173 wolves, and there's only one other study in the world that's radio collared that many wolves. Radio collaring is absolutely essential to know where they are in the forest, because you just can't find them and track them any other way.
Everything that you see in this park is an interconnected web. Each species adds a harmonious part to another species. It's like working with a watch. If you were to take a watch and take various parts out and then gradually put it back together, that watch wouldn't work in the same way. And to us, this wilderness is like that. If you were to take one aspect out of it, the whole park wouldn't have the same feeling. It would still be there, would function, but you wouldn't feel the same way about it.
Often the wolves may be traveling a couple of kilometers away. We may think of them as single wolves out there, but they're actually in touch with each other. They know where each other are. Their trails may braid back and forth now and again. They're really hunting as one unit. And then vocal communication is something that has really intrigued us over the years. Each individual wolf has its own signature in it in terms of the harmonic overtones. So wolves have differences, just like you could identify two different singing humans, singing the same song, you know the different person, you identify them on the basis of their harmonic overtones. Wolves have their own harmonic overtones. But most interesting is we discovered that the wolf's ear, its ability to differentiate these overtones, is much more sensitive than the human ear. So they know when they hear a howl, whether it's a member of their own pack or whether it's some other wolf from another pack.
We have found that when two wolves have been giving the same resonant deep howls but haven't been together and eventually do come together, if one is a subordinate animal, it'll change the howl it's eliciting to a far more treble, timorous howl and not have the resonant tones in it. We found that when a wolf is killed, that the other animals grieve for it. We call this a mourn howl. It definitely descends in scale and has a very, very definitive sound of its own.
It's always fresh and always exciting to hear that voice of the wilderness. We still want to turn off our science thinking sometimes and just sit there quietly and watch the, you know, the moonlight across the water and just listen to it.
It is the wolf that makes Algonquin Park wild. It reminds us of our own roots as the greatest predator of the wilderness. Nature's harshest rules are rarely seen by visitors to the park. Neither are the unforgiving laws of the men who made it. Until 1958, wolves inside its boundaries were hunted almost to extinction by the park's own wardens. Even here, the perception of raw, untamed nature is not the reality. The park itself was created by lumber barons, and for over a century, logging within its boundaries has never stopped. Hunting is also allowed in about 40% of the park's territory, although the wolf is not one of the hunted. But outside the park, wolves are still killed indiscriminately. As they track prey animals into the surrounding farmlands, old attitudes still prevail. The only good wolf is a dead wolf, even if it's a red wolf, one of the rarest animals on Earth.
In this population, one of the most important discoveries of the research is that the main cause of death is humans. Close to 70% are caused by humans. And this is a park where they're supposed to be protected.
Oh, there, that's a really good signal.
More than half this population, which is about 150 wolves in late winter, spend some time outside the park. Outside the park, there are no game laws whatsoever to prevent their killing. People can kill them in any amount, in any time, anywhere, and not even report the kill.
Are you getting it to the left or to the right of the water?
Straight towards it. There are people that are killing wolves out there just because they hate them. The fur isn't worth anything. They just leave the carcasses in the bush and feel they've done a social service by getting rid of a wolf.
Towards the water or away from the water? When the European colonizers first came to North America, they came from Europe with the attitude that wolves were evil. They were the manifest evil. And so they tried to eliminate them because they were their competitor. Oh, it's a small animal.
It hasn't decomposed. Surprising considering the warmth.
Look at the tail.
It's got mange.
Basically, Ontario has the laxest laws for protecting wolves anywhere in North America or in the world apart from Russia. As far as killing wolves, you don't need to have anything but a small game license. A landowner can kill them in any amount at any time of year without any bag limit. And the same goes for a person with a small game license. You have to have a license for killing a bear, you have to have a license for killing a moose, a deer, even a raccoon. Can we not give the wolf the same amount of respect as we are for the rest of the animals within this system?
Why is it that we love to hate the wolf, and at the same time we're drawn by its lonely howl? Every year in late August, hundreds of people travel to the park for a late-night wolf howl. It's a sign that attitudes may be changing.
If wolves don't answer back, it does not mean that wolves are not here. It means they could be here and they're choosing not to answer back, or they have been here today, they're off hunting and may come back later on this evening. no matter if the howl is held on the side of a busy highway or if it's held on a very quiet back road in the park, it doesn't matter. It's the sound of the animal that really ties the people to the wilderness that the park really supports. It's a mythical animal. It's an animal that people still fear and misunderstand. So to have a chance of going somewhere and actually hearing a wolf howl, that is a really big thrill for most people. Twice on howls right here, we had a wolf come out. We actually heard it walking in the woods beside us, and it came up between the cars as we were leaving. Twice we saw a wolf from this very site. Outside the park, there still remains a fairly strong anti-wolf sentiment, and that certainly, I think, has been softened over the last few decades by the park's public wolf howl program. Not only is it educating people, but it's showing local people that the wolves are a major draw, and that means an economic gain for them if they are smart about it.
If you consider the wolf as a beautiful animal, it's the distillate of wilderness. It lifts your spirits. You have an empathy with that animal. Also, it is a reflection on how comfortable we are with the wilderness. If you're comfortable of being out there in the darkness and you hear that sound, to you it's almost a communion with nature. If you're not comfortable with being in the wilderness, if you're frightened of the dark, if you're frightened of what's out there, then that is a harrowing sound. It's a harrowing experience.
Spring is a time of rebirth in the wilderness. As the snow melts, animals awaken from their long winter's night to feast once again on the bounty of a new day. As winter gives way to spring, the residue of nature's most unforgiving season is revealed. A young wolf, too small and weak to survive the harsh cold, like many of the myths about Algonquin Park, is not what it appears to be.
Well, it doesn't have any broken ribs, doesn't have any broken legs, and basically no skeletal injuries on this side.
No, it looks fairly intact. The head is all intact, the head area here.
It's got lots of flesh on its shoulders. I don't think it's starved.
Look at that nose. Now that is not a wolf nose. That's a coyote nose. And these animals are losing a lot of their genetic integrity. This animal is far more coyote-like than wolf-like.
And yet it's an Algonquin Park wolf, even though it's died out in the farmland, and it's the future of the Algonquin Park wolf population. It's hard to think of this being an efficient predator on moose. It's just too small. In the years of our study, in just 14 years, the percent of females less than 50 pounds is statistically greater, so the animals are getting smaller. Skull sizes are shrinking as well. And genetically, the geneticists tell us of the genetic evidence that there's an increase in, using a genetics term, coyote-type haplotypes in the population rather than wolf-type. That's increased 30% since 1960, so that's pretty frightening. So what we're seeing here is the genetic erosion of the Algonquin wolf.
That tail's a little frozen. Rigidity.
Just get the hips in. I can't hold it much longer.
Okay.
So he's spent a life
the short life we've known him, crossing an awful lot of roads and around a fair amount of settlement, which is more coyote-like than wolf-like.
Well, he's come a fair ways from Mud Turtle Lake.
A third of the population dies every year. The recruitment back into the population of young animals is about 21%. You model that in any population model, as we have with other scientists, and it shows extinction of the population within a very few decades. So it's very clear that if the levels of human mortality continue in Algonquin Park as they have in the past, this population is going to go down the tube. And as it goes down the tube, it's not just this population, it's a distinct species of mammal. I mean, we who provide expertise to all the other countries in the world on managing wildlife, we think we're so enlightened and so on. Are we going to stand back and let a major mammal species go extinct? Now, unless something's done in Algonquin Park, our prediction from our research is that's what's going to happen.
John and Mary Theberge are leaving Algonquin Park for the last time. Their research is complete, and although their conclusions have stirred up a controversy, subsequent studies have all supported their bottom line. The wolf of Algonquin is the purest genetic form of red wolf in the world, and on the brink of extinction. In North America, there has never been a documented case of wolves hunting and killing a human being. Yet no more controversial animal lives. None is more misunderstood. What do you hear in the howl of the wolf? Is it the haunting song of the wild, or your worst nightmare? Either way, today its howl has changed to a whimper, and before it falls completely silent, we should all listen more carefully.
Industrious, efficient, monogamous, and definitely eager. The Canadian beaver is cutting down forests from one end of the planet to the other. From the southern tip of South America to the barrens of the high Arctic,
the incredible legacy of nature's super engineer is alive, thriving, and still wreaking havoc wherever it goes. With a dexterous front end engineered for land and powerful hind feet webbed for water, the Canadian beaver is well designed to bridge two worlds, where water meets boreal forest. A landscape architect capable of building itself a home that is a predator-proof bunker, the Beaver Lodge is an ecological marvel. The door is underwater, keeping enemies out and warm air in. Safe and snug inside, they live in tight-knit families that can include up to 8 children. No other animal on Earth builds anything like this. It is the beaver's edge, enabling it to colonize a hemisphere. Of all nature's creations, only coral and man have had a greater impact on our planet. For 30 million years, beaver-like animals have thrived in the Northern Hemisphere. Paleontologist Dick Harrington knows this giant well, the largest beaver species the world has ever known.
The giant beaver originated about 3 million years ago. It developed in size, of course. This is probably the equivalent of a black bear in size. You can see, how big that is. And that if you had a black bear standing on its haunches, it probably wouldn't be very different from what we see here.
The beaver of today and yesterday are built on fundamentally the same body type. The modern beaver is only smaller, except for its tail.
With the modern beaver, it has a very wide spatulate tail, and when it slaps the water, it's an alarm signal, but probably an animal of this size wouldn't need such a big alarm signal. I think it would be more alarming in itself.
The giant beaver died out 10,000 years ago, but the search continues for the ancestor of all beavers.
There is probably a common ancestor. It begins with Dipoides here, this really small beaver that we found on Ellesmere Island about 3.5 million years ago.
To search for the origins of the Canadian beaver, Dick Harrington has traveled almost as far as the North Pole. Here, 1,500 kilometers above the modern tree line, a super beaver once thrived.
Well, we're on Ellesmere Island, and we're about 78 degrees 30 minutes latitude north, so this is really the high Arctic. And it's kind of mind-boggling to find remains of a beaver pond at this site. And of course, it is not a modern one. The environment was a lot warmer when these animals were living around here, which is about 3.5 million years old, maybe 3 to 4 million years old.
The wood that Dick's excavating is over 3 million years old, but it burns as if it were cut yesterday. Prehistoric beavers built a dam here. Locked in permafrost for a small eternity, it provides a window into the beaver's ancient past.
Probably about 7 or 8 inches in, you run into frozen ground. It's not too deeply lodged in there. I don't think it's moving a bit. Yeah, there it comes. Oh yeah, this is great because you can see the beaver cutting right across here. You never know what the hell you're going to get in the next shovelful. You know, that's the most exciting part of paleontology, in my opinion. Yeah, it is. Yeah. Yeah, I found a fragment of a beaver tooth, and it came from just back here behind me yesterday. So it's nice to know there's still some fossils in there. You always hope as a paleontologist to find unique and interesting and scientifically important specimens, and this has about all of those characters.
Along with the shark, the beaver is one of the few survivors of an evolutionary era 30 million years in the making. And although both a Canadian and European subspecies have evolved, only the Canadian has maintained the ability to build lodges and dams, changed the course of man's own history, and transformed entire continents. Nestled between the Rocky Mountain foothills and the Great Plains of central Alberta, Elk Island National Park is a rectangle of green amidst endless fields of grain. It's an ideal home for the beaver. Elk Island is home to the highest year-round concentrations of ungulates, or large hoofed mammals on Earth. Per square kilometer, there are more animals with hooves here than on Africa's Serengeti Plain. Elk Island is unique, a completely closed park system. It's fenced off from the outside world to make sure that bison and elk don't venture onto surrounding highways and cattle don't wander in. Set aside in 1906 to protect the last wild elk on the prairies, it's a perfect environment for the beaver's greatest admirers to study nature's superhero.
My personal history with beaver goes back to my childhood. I grew up adjacent to a beaver colony, a whole pond system maintained and structured by beaver. And that's where I spent my childhood, was associating with the beaver in those colonies. And coming to Elk Island was kind of like going back to that. The region is called the Beaver Hills because it had historically a very high population of beaver. People often refer to the beaver as being a very industrious engineer in the landscape, and in fact they are. When you compare their behavior to a land-dwelling species like the bison, for instance, they're totally different. A bison moves into this system, he has to seek out forage, consume it, and then move on and seek out more forage. Well, the beaver don't do that. They bring the forage to themselves. They create situations where they gather large quantities of woody material back to a central communal spot. And it takes a tremendous amount of effort and ingenuity on their part sometimes. That's totally unlike most other species, especially large mammal species.
Beavers use their ingenuity to change the world with their ponds, which they don't find but create by flooding narrow streams with amazing dams. Glynis Hood is a biologist studying the impact of beavers on the park, and she's as eager as they are.
This is an incredible structure. There are no other animals in the wild that you'll see that can create something like this. This is just a civil engineering feat that they've done here. The dams create this moat around the castle, and it's home for the whole colony. Now, how they build these things is just amazing, because they choose an area in the stream where it's usually the narrowest spot so that they don't have to put as much effort in as if it was a long breach in the stream. And they'll often start on the edge of the stream that has the least amount of current. And they'll put down some willows, they'll carry them over in their mouth, they'll go down and they'll pack them down either with rocks, which they carry in their hands, or with mud.
These branches aren't simply rammed into the stream bank. This beaver is also a super weaver. They build a dam by literally knitting willow branches together, layer upon layer, until an intricate barrier is created.
When you get a stream like this where there's not much water pressure against the dam or there's not a lot of stream flow, they often will seal it right tight with mud. But when you get dams in faster flowing streams, they'll actually allow some water to trickle through so that it doesn't erode the dam completely. So they'll actually accommodate the dam to what kind of current you have behind it.
In Elk Island, retreating Ice Age glaciers left behind subtle hills and bowls, ideal for the beaver to transform narrow streams into a network of ponds. New water on the land means more new growth, more food for the ungulates, and a lot more.
Everything that lives here relies upon the presence of a beaver pond in one way or the other. The park has a tremendously rich avifauna resource. 220 some different bird species either live or pass through here, most of which associated at one time or another with a wetland like this. And it's critical to the survival of just about everything that lives within Elk Island National Park.
The beaver is known as a keystone species, an animal capable of affecting entire ecosystems. In Elk Island, they've created new wetlands, inspiring a vast diversity of vegetation to grow. They've also opened up the forest canopy by cutting down trees. And they've created areas where many species of amphibians and fish can thrive. In all, the beaver's energetic re-engineering activities create a more diverse, densely populated, and healthy ecosystem.
Actually, if I were to design the perfect animal, I'd design the beaver, to tell you the truth. Because the things that this animal has going for it to live in the environment that it does are just incredible. Like when you look at the beaver's teeth, you see this orange enamel on the front, which is very, very hard. And then underneath the tooth is a lot softer material. The back part of the tooth wears down faster than the front part, so that it's very, very sharp all the time, so you end up with this chisel-like feature that allows it to chew through wood really well. Now, being an aquatic animal, they've got a couple of things that they've adapted. They can be underwater for up to 15 minutes. They have a specially adapted respiratory system. And when they submerge, their nose and their ears have valves in them that shut them off so that they can't get water in there. Also, their lips are actually behind their teeth, so that when they chew underwater, they don't get water rushing down into their throat. With their eyes, they have a third eyelid that can go over to protect their eyes from the water. And they're very, very streamlined to the water, and then they've got this wonderful tail that acts like a rudder and a warning device for them. So they're just perfectly designed for what they're made to do.
But all that Super Beaver really wants is to eat a tree in peace. And that can mean taking down 200 of them a year. Yet beavers don't actually like the taste of wood. It's the bark they're after, with a side order of branches and leaves. The rest is used as construction material or simply left where it fell.
Yeah, this is a great example of one of the larger trees. You can see that it's already over 50 centimeters in diameter that they've knocked this tree down. And just like a woodworker with his chisel, the beavers knock out these wood chips that are just, actually, if you put it next to my hand, they're actually very large. And as you can see, there's teeth marks all throughout the stump, and basically a small rodent is able to take down a tree that's absolutely massive. Because not only are they going for food, but if beaver don't chew wood and chew trees, their teeth continually grow, and they actually get to the point where they can't chew at all and they'll die. So chewing is a way to keep them alive as well.
These lumberjacks of the wild run a family business. Parents and their children, called kits, work closely to gather food for their daily diet or to stockpile for the winter ahead. A single lodge can contain up to 12 beavers, and tonight is a rare glimpse of the whole family at work.
Tonight we've counted at least 8 beaver, if not 9, from all age ranges. There's ones that were just born this year and emerged in July, and the adults, and they're just gathering up food for the fall and to put into their food cache. It's just great.
Once they were slaughtered almost to extinction, but the super beaver has risen again to become, at least here, a superhero. And now it's the park's only chance against an upcoming catastrophe. In the 18th and 19th centuries, European fur traders had an insatiable appetite for Canadian beaver pelts. The two-tone qualities of a shiny, durable outer layer with a soft felt underside made it an industry favorite. So when Europeans opened up the New World, it was in search of beavers.
Now what's even more amazing in Elk Island is that during the fur trade in the 1850s, by the 1850s actually, beaver were completely wiped out of this area. There weren't any beaver around at all.
These aerial photographs of Elk Island National Park from the 1920s show a surprising impact of the beaver's extermination. For almost a century, more than 99% of the land was dry.
And then they were successfully reintroduced in 1941. The beaver started damming up streams and impounding water, and it went from less than 1% to almost 8% coverage in the park, and it has really helped out maintaining water on the landscape here in Elk Island.
The beaver was able to increase Elk Island's water coverage tenfold because of how they operate. Beavers colonize not as a single lodge, but in a network of them, spread across the landscape. When a family gets too big for its pond, the kits, at about 2 years of age, are forced to emigrate to a neighboring waterway. It's the riskiest trip of their young lives. Traveling on land, they're almost defenseless and quickly join the food chain as easy prey for bears, wolves, and coyotes. But those who do make it to a new source of water become the founding fathers of a fresh chain of ponds. Because of this consistent pattern of expansion, it's hard to tell from these lush meadows and forests that Elk Island National Park is experiencing the worst drought in over 130 years. In times like this, it's easy to understand why First Nations people valued the super beaver for more than just its fur.
And particularly on the plains, First Nations people had a very high respect for the beaver as a species and didn't harvest the animal very much. And the reason for that was that if you're ever a person wandering across the Great Plains of Central North America in a drought like we're experiencing right now, there's 2 things you need to survive, or 3 things: food, shelter, and water. And during a drought, where do you find water in the Great Plains? Either in major river courses or in the tributaries that feed them. And those tributaries, if they're dammed up by beaver, have a year-round permanent source of water.
In a drought, the pressures on any ecosystem are intense. Elk Island's large land animals depend on the beaver's water management practices to survive. The wardens have even seen wildlife running into the park because it's the only place where there is water. Here, the moose, the largest land animal, doesn't have to give up its favorite forage, which studies have shown to be the growth on the edge of beaver ponds. And elk, for whom the national park was created, can thank only the beaver for keeping their safe haven from becoming a dust bowl. In just 60 years, the Elk Island beaver population has increased from 2 reintroduced animals to over 3,000. But although they're now influential enough to reduce the effects of a drought, pond boundaries have still been dramatically reduced, exposing soggy mudflats that create new dangers. And despite the beaver's best efforts, this drought will still claim her dead.
This is an adult cow elk that entered this pond system probably for a drink. And it was the last decision she made because she got mired in the mud and eventually succumbed to the stress of being mired and probably drowned in her sleep eventually.
These newly exposed mudflats that are a death trap to others are also a fresh bonanza of marsh grasses for the beaver. And while ungulates need 4 stomachs to squeeze nutrition from grass, the beaver has only 1 stomach, and the gift of coprophagy.
That's kind of gross, but it works really well for beaver, is it will defecate, and then it can eat that material again and get the nutrients that were left the first time around out again. And that's very common for beaver to do. And they actually have 2 different types of pellets, the ones that stay out and the ones that get re-ingested.
Even when the drought appears to be securing a solid foothold on its territory, drying it to a no man's land, Super Beaver doesn't give up. He digs in.
This is one of the ponds that was probably the most consistently filled ponds that I chose for my study area. It was one of the ponds where we had a long-term beaver population and very stable as far as water levels and beaver. The air photos show it and the beaver records show it. What we have now is basically a mudflat.
Instead of surrendering to the drought, the beavers here have dug a deep network of trenches throughout their former pond to keep water on the land.
Beaver naturally make channels, and they usually make channels from the pond edge up into the woody area, and that's normal. What we don't see are channels in the middle of the pond just to maintain water levels. That is something that I've never seen before, trying to just keep some sort of water level here so they have access throughout their original territory.
Man has learned from Elk Island that when conditions are right, this amazing rodent makes the ecosystem a paradise for all. And when conditions are devastating, it keeps paradise from becoming a desert. But man still hasn't learned that transplanting a species like the beaver into a foreign ecosystem is like welcoming the serpent to Eden. It may look like North America's Great Rocky Mountains, but this is actually the southern tip of South America. 14,000 kilometers from its Canadian birthplace, Tierra del Fuego has become a new home and a new conquest for the super beaver. This last piece of land before Antarctica is well known for its wicked winds, dangerous seas, a lot of penguins, and now the beaver. The great Charles Darwin himself visited Tierra del Fuego in 1832, and even he could not have imagined what would sprout here only a century later. Tierra del Fuego is a strange, enchanted land, isolated at the end of the world, a place where life has evolved all on its own. Here, only migrating seabirds and marine life could come and go as they please. There's only one principal type of tree, the southern beech. Moss dominates the forest. Rabbits were introduced and still run wild. There are no frogs or snakes. In fact, no reptiles or amphibians of any kind. There are few land animals. Nothing could get on or off this continental dead end. Biodiversity on the land is amazingly low, but what is here in abundance. For a beaver, that means massive, virgin forests, its favorite food and habitat. With no competition or predators around, it's a perfect recipe for disaster. In 1947, the Argentine government of Juan Perón imported 25 pairs of beavers from Canada to inspire a local fur industry in Ushuaia, the southernmost city in the world. But the experiment failed miserably. It's so cold here that the imported beavers grew thick, greasy pelts, unsuitable for the fur trade. And when the fur farming stopped, it wasn't long before some escaped into the wild. The beaver, whose incisors never stop growing and who must constantly gnaw on wood or die, continued to feed and multiply. Today, there are over 100,000 beavers on Tierra del Fuego. Julio Escobar hopes to find a way to control this now out-of-control population. Down below, the forest floor has been decimated by the beavers, and ponds and dams litter the landscape. For over a decade, Julio has tracked this foreign invader and the mounting damage.
The story of the beavers here is very interesting. I mean, it's truly amazing to see a place I've known since I was a child, dynamically shifting before my eyes, with dramatic new environmental changes and the different perspectives that come with them.
Julio has no trouble finding his super beavers. Signs of their ferocious appetite are everywhere. His first stop is a valley where beaver dams have flooded a vast expanse of forest, turning it into a virtual tree cemetery.
The combined impacts of the beavers here may or may not be environmentally sustainable. I mean, this impact is significant.
For waterfowl, the beaver's invasion has been a bonanza, and tourists love the animal. The only beaver colony in the southern hemisphere is a star attraction. But in the 1980s, the population reached critical mass, and now ranch owners are preparing to go to war.
This place of 50,000 acres was donated to my great-grandfather for his work as a missionary with the Yagan Indians in 1886. The beavers to us are a plague. They do an awful lot of damage. Gain fence posts. If you don't peel the bark off a fence post, or else use old dried posts, in a couple of days you'll have them chewed through. So most of our fences are in valleys because it's the only place you can really dig a post hole. Well, the beavers build dams usually in series in these valleys and cover up our fences. It was to divide two fields for winter use and summer use. Once there was only 2 strands of the wire left. The rest were all underwater, which froze over, and then the sheep just walked right across.
In Tierra del Fuego, beavers and humans are now in direct competition. Both species like the valleys, where there's plenty of water and trees. But today, it's the beaver that's winning this contest of wills, forcing landowners to take matters into their own hands.
Well, for beaver control, we just use shoot the beavers. We don't use traps because we find them rather dangerous. We will run over them with a car if we can, if we find them on the road. Since the houses are out in the lakes that they form, dogs can't get at them. They're safe, which makes them able to keep increasing.
With no predators to worry about, the Argentine beaver has lost its sense of fear. Now the next stage of their invasion has begun, and no one knows if it can be stopped. The Canadian beaver, valley by valley, is slowly colonizing Tierra del Fuego and looking north to the continent beyond.
Looking throughout the island here in Tierra del Fuego and seeing how much of the valleys, the most physically ideal places for the beaver, have already been taken over by them, it's 100% taken already. So it raises an important question. Will the pressures of their own population growth force them to now expand into less ideal areas where they wouldn't normally go?
In only 50 years, 50 beavers have grown to become 100,000. With no predators around, they have a license to chew and can wander anywhere they like. And when they get tired of walking, they simply flood the forest.
First, they colonized the valleys in the south of the island in the 80s and then moved north in the 90s.
But the beaver of Tierra del Fuego has colonized more than just valleys. Even high on mountain slopes, places they rarely go in Canada, they've made a home. It probably took days to climb this high, and Julio has a theory on what kept them going. Studies have shown that beavers will work incessantly to stop the sound of running water. It seems to drive them a little crazy. One researcher placed speakers playing recorded water noises within range of the beavers. Soon enough, the speakers were packed in mud, stifling the sound. Julio believes that beavers heard the sound of meltwater running down the side of this mountain. Driven by instinct, they climbed up to stop the maddening noise. Only in a land without predators would they dare to scale such heights. Today, Julio too has climbed up to investigate the discovery of a mountain beaver dam that broke. The dry pond bed reveals a labyrinth of intricate tunnels, a new insight into the beaver's work ethic. They chose to build in a peat bog which retains water naturally and offers easy, deep digging. But when spring arrived, meltwater from these snow-covered mountains proved too much, and the dam buckled under the pressure. The result was a mudslide that destroyed everything in its path and blocked the road below for days. Anyone in its way would have been killed. Now it's no surprise that Julio can see only one solution, a way that includes a renewed role for the hunter.
This could be the only way to control our beaver problem. The beaver population is going to keep growing, and there's nothing here in nature to stop it. So the only possible solution is to implement a program recruiting the locals to become hunters. Extracting them individually is our only chance to start containing the beaver problem.
Once again, but this time at the opposite end of the world, it means setting a trap, and then partially destroying the dam to bait the beaver into renovations. The best solution of all is to use the beaver's own industry against itself. The government has now implemented a bounty and will pay 5 pesos for every beaver tail turned in. But Julio concedes it's not enough to stop the growing tide of beavers that has already flooded valleys and mountains, forcing this freshwater creature to conquer the surrounding ocean itself. Julio has hired a boat to investigate reports that the beaver has already reached the islands to the north. If they are there, they're on their way to the mainland.
We don't know how many islands the beavers have reached, but it's many, many islands. Salt water is obviously not a problem for them. And given the beavers' size, these are huge distances they're traveling. So soon, the problem will be, how do we cope with them on the mainland?
In its constant quest for new territory, Super Beaver has now built a dam on the edge of the ocean. Now a saltwater swimmer, it's quite possible that within 10 years, it will reach the mainland. And if it does, that crisis could make the invasion of Tierra del Fuego seem like a minor skirmish. So far, South America's best defense against the super beaver's expansion from Tierra del Fuego to the mainland has been the natural barrier of the Darwin Mountains. But if it does reach the continent, it could be a disaster. The problem is, like Tierra del Fuego, the southern mainland doesn't have much biodiversity either. There aren't enough of the right kind of plants to turn flooded forest into healthy marsh. So instead of inspiring life like it does in Canada, the beaver here destroys ecosystems. Once the beaver invades the mainland, the forests of the Andes' eastern slopes, even Amazonia itself, are within reach. And if it does make it all the way to the rainforests of Brazil, it will be up to the crocodile and piranha to win the battle of the teeth that threatens an entire continent. But today, the Canadian beaver isn't just threatening South America. It's also invaded Russia and parts of Scandinavia. Here too, it's causing ecological havoc and forcing the less industrious European beaver to retreat from its own ancient and slightly drier habitat. One Russian scientist, comparing the two, said that the Canadian beavers have more stamina and adaptability. They are more active and they can survive better, while a British newspaper sniffed at Canadian beavers as uncivilized brutes. Introducing a foreign animal to a fragile new habitat is a man-made formula for a natural disaster. But at home in Canada, the beaver has been working miracles for thousands of years. They may be a plague to South American ranchers, but here farmers consider them a blessing. When Super Beaver builds his hideout, the lodge, he hauls a massive amount of wood into the water, and as it slowly rots,
nitrogen is deposited on the muddy bottoms of ponds and streams. Incredibly, this natural fertilizer has helped to create almost all of North America's best farmland.
Well, this is very typical of what you get outside of Elk Island, because you've got agricultural fields right up to the boundary in many cases, and also urban development happening at an explosive rate in Alberta. So what you have here is a field for agricultural purposes, but what you can see are some remnant wetlands that might have been here before, and they would have probably been connected to the system that we just saw through waterways and the like. So this would have been beaver habitat. You've got another remnant wetland over there as well.
From farming to fur trading, the beaver's indisputable role in the creation of a country has not gone unnoticed.
Beaver are the Canadian symbol, because of its influence on the exploration and development of this country. The Hudson's Bay Company and their exploration of the West, because of the presence of beaver, opened up this country. And beaver are a very resourceful, tough, and intelligent species, much like Canadians.
But the beaver was an integral part of Canada, long before people ever came here. Evolution dealt it a winning hand millions of years ago. Paleontologist Dick Harrington has even found evidence of it close to the North Pole.
As far as the beavers and their behavior, I think that a type of behavior that's established very early on and is successful will tend to remain in that line. And of course, we know it's still very successful because of these transfers to South America, and we've seen what kind of havoc they've been able to wreak down there.
From the top of the globe all the way to the bottom, the Canadian beaver is now taking its best shot at world domination.
With all the changes that it makes to its habitat, and there are many other animals that modify their surroundings, but when you compare any of them to what the beaver does, making a whole new world out of whatever environment it finds to live in, it truly makes it a super beaver.
Realmente sí, es un super beaver.
As long as there is wood, as long as there is running water, nature's super beaver will fight for lodges, dams, and the Canadian way. Stronger than an ice age and unfazed by global warming, this modest rodent is changing the world. Superhero or supervillain? Only time will tell.